Welcome to Dollars and Cents with Friedman Financial, the home for financial advice in a language you can understand. Created by Marc Friedman of Friedman Financial, he and his team of certified financial planner professionals will discuss timely topics that help individuals and families make smart financial decisions. And now, get ready for this week's edition of Dollars and Cents with Friedman Financial.
Welcome back to another edition of Dollars and Cents, our weekly podcast where we provide you with financial advice in a language you can understand. I'll be your host today, Marion Gilman. Your typical host, Marc Friedman, is traveling this week, so I am delighted to be here with our Director of Financial Planning, Christian Karcher. How are you today, Christian?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, my goodness, please. My pleasure. Christian does all of the financial planning in our office. I mean, he is a very, very valuable resource. So for those clients of our office who already know him, you know he's a very, very valuable resource here. For those of you who don't know him, if you come and visit us, you will meet him. So we're lucky to have him. Anyways, so we're here. We have a topic today to talk about.
That's right. It's summer.
It's summer.
Our snowbirds are all coming back from their warm locations.
Yeah.
And I figured we would talk about changing residences or moving or changing your home state, as it were, in retirement. It's something that comes up a lot, and particularly at this time of the year where people are making that transition and trying to figure out, okay, so what state do I actually belong to?
Absolutely. And, you know, in the New England area, we have a lot of clients who end up going to Florida. That seems to be one of the prime destinations for clients in the Boston area. And as you might know, most of our clients live within, you know, let's say 10 miles of the office. So we have a lot of clients that live right around here. It can be really nasty in the winter around here, a lot of ice and snow. So they like to get out of that ice and snow and go to Florida. And there are some benefits to living in Florida, right?
There absolutely are. Besides just the sunny and not
Absolutely.
A foot of snow every other week.
There are financial benefits
There are
as
financial
well.
benefits in
So
Florida.
Maybe you can let us know some of those financial benefits of living in Florida.
Yeah, well, if you make Florida your primary residence, Florida doesn't have a state income tax, which is probably the biggest benefit that people see most directly when moving to Florida, is all of a sudden that state income tax goes away.
And in Massachusetts, the state income tax rate is 5%. So all of a sudden, you're not paying 5% state tax anymore. Now, there are other financial considerations with living in Florida because they do have other taxes, and there are other items that could be more expensive in Florida. In particular, we hear a lot about insurance costs in Florida.
Oh, absolutely. And particularly the last few years, as Florida's been hit with so many hurricanes, and it's such a litigious state, as they say, where there's a lot of lawsuits, there's a lot of companies coming in to make sure after a storm that homeowners insurance has to pay out. Well, when homeowners insurance is paying out, they need to start increasing their premiums to be able to cover their costs. And so what we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years is all of a sudden the costs associated with that homeowner's insurance is creeping up and up.
And it depends what area of Florida you live in, but there are areas of Florida that are more expensive for homeowners insurance than others, just because they're prime locations for some of these storms.
Right, particularly if you're closer to the beach, which is a great benefit,
Absolutely.
you know, as a homeowner. But when the storm comes around, all of a sudden that becomes a little bit more dangerous financially as well.
Absolutely. I also understand that auto insurance can be fairly costly for older people in Florida, and that tends to be the older people who do move to Florida. So sometimes they are seeing the cost of auto insurance along with homeowners insurance increase. However, again, because there's no state income tax there, it can be advantageous. However, what are some of the things we need to watch out for if you are going to maintain a residence in both somewhere in the New England area or Boston area and in Florida, or another state and in Florida?
Yeah, absolutely. So having two different residencies is great, except for you start to say, well, so where do I technically live? And under the U.S. tax code, there is something called the domicile. It's saying this is where I intend to stay.
This is my primary
This
home.
is my primary home. This is my intent. And that's
Right.
how the law is written. It says it's wherever you intend to live.
Yep.
Now the question becomes, how do you define intent? The only person who knows what your intent is on where to live and where to go back to and where your primary home is yourself. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people that lie about what their intent is to go to a state that's more tax advantageous.
So how can you prove that it's your intent, other than in your head? How do you prove that to a government agency if they question your intent?
Right. So there's a few things that you want to consider. Number one is when you move and you've changed your domicile from, say, Massachusetts to Florida, in the year that you do that, on your taxes, you usually have to say, I have moved. And they say, what date did you move? A lot of people will put January 1st because it simplifies their taxes. They don't have to do like a half Massachusetts resident, half Florida resident. However, that raises red flags for whatever state you're leaving to say, okay, you moved exactly on, you packed up your boxes as New Year's Eve was happening. You got in the car and you moved in the next day. You sure about that?
Right.
And so having that January 1st date can be a big red flag.
And remember, you don't want them questioning you, because that's just a pain in the neck. You have to provide proof.
Absolutely. But there's a few other things that if you actually are, in fact, moving and changing your domicile, will happen naturally. Things like where your driver's license is registered. If you want to move to Florida, let's say, from Massachusetts, getting a Florida driver's license and returning your Massachusetts one, that's one step.
And so that's, again, very important. If you want to be a permanent resident, a primary resident of Florida, you need to have a Florida driver's license. And granted, you might still go back and forth, and maybe you don't think about it as having such significance, but if your primary residence is Florida, it has to be a Florida driver's license.
It really should be. And then on top of that, things that go along with that, voting registration, where you're voting.
There you go. Yep.
Where you might be involved in community events. If you've got clubs and activities that you're going to in Florida, that kind of tells you, okay, I want to be involved in this community. This is where I am domiciling. The other funny one, there was actually a case where someone had left New York and they went to Florida, and New York called up and questioned them about it. And it was it was a higher income person, and so there was a lot of questions. It actually went to the courts to figure out. And the thing that broke the camel's back, as it was written in the deciding opinion, was the person who was being sued to say they live in New York had actually moved their dog to Florida. And their dog, that's a very clear intent. My dog is in Florida. That's where I want to live. And that ended up being the thing that they said, okay, their intent is clearly to live in Florida. So even things as small as that can impact how they view where you're living and where you're intending to live. That's
amazing, because and this has happened a lot recently with some of the tax law changes over the past few years. There has been an exodus of some of the higher tax states moving to low tax states. Now, Florida is one of them. New Hampshire is another no state tax. So many of these places have similar rules and regulations. But you want to be very careful to be sure that you're spending enough time in Florida as well, that you have established roots there. As Christian says, you're partaking in activities in Florida. You're spending more than half the year in your place in Florida, even if you still maintain a residence here.
Absolutely.
What are some other items that you might need to do in order to prove a different residency?
Well, one of the easiest things you can do is you can say, I'm selling my home in my former state and buying a new home in a new state, and I'll just rent when I go back.
Yeah.
That's an easy one to say, okay, clearly, if you own the home, that's probably going to be your home. But also, there are states where, okay, in California, there's a lot of people who leave California and say, I'm going to say that I'm living somewhere else, but still spend a lot of time maybe visiting California. And so different states are getting wise to this, and changing their own guidance on what is considered a resident. And so for tax purposes particularly.
Right.
And so in California, they've said if you spend more than 75% of your time in California, you might say that you're domiciled elsewhere, but we still claim you as a resident and you need to pay us taxes. And so
Be aware.
Being aware of the local rules. In Massachusetts, there's not a lot where Massachusetts, because it's a lower tax state in comparison
To California.
to California
right, yeah.
or New York.
New York as well. Yeah.
So there's not as many rules on the books, but generally speaking, the driver's license, where your car is registered, if
Yeah.
you've got a car in both places, one of the suggestions I've seen, this is not like legally binding, but have your nicer car in the place you want to domicile. Don't have just a junker down in one place and a nice car where you're not living.
Yeah.
So that is all things you can consider as you're changing your residence.
Yeah, and one of the other things that we've seen in the office is people change their address on their account statements.
Yes,
You know, so
absolutely.
when you have financial accounts, it's very important to change the registration on those to your primary residence. So that is another way, if you're getting your mail, your important mail in Florida, and you know that denotes that that is your primary residence. Also, it's very important because if you have a retirement account and you're withdrawing money from that retirement account, it's extremely important to have the correct resident state on your address of that account, because when we're withholding taxes from a retirement account distribution, if your account registration says Massachusetts, the LPL will automatically withhold 5% state tax if you're withholding federal tax. If you're living in Florida, you don't want to be paying taxes to Massachusetts, because then you have to file a form to get those taxes back. So that's another critical component.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think you want to pay very close attention, particularly for those of you who might take up a residence that is relatively close by, such as New Hampshire, because we actually have a lot of clients that do that as well, that you make sure you spend the majority of your time in your primary residence. And, you know, again, if you're using electricity there are ways, if the IRS wants to question you, there are ways they can get records.
Right, and even cellular data and GPS tracking and time signatures on different phone calls. I mean, it is amazing the level of detail they can go into to determine these things.
That's shocking, actually.
It is, and I think the easiest...
Talk about Big Brother, right?
Talk about Big Brother. So the easiest solution here is to make it just abundantly clear where that domicile is, and to also not try to play games with it.
Yeah.
If you want to live somewhere, do it for all of the amenities and take the tax benefit as an added versus going out of your way to try to get something a little bit
budget,
better.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah, and so, you know, there was an old saying, and I still say it occasionally, and that is, don't let the tax tail wag the dog, because you don't want to make financial decisions just because of taxes. Sometimes that's just not a good solution to well, most of the time, it's not a good solution to anything. Well, if now's the time for you to look into some of this, if you're thinking of changing residence, or if it's time for you to get serious about your money and you'd like a second opinion, you'd like to do some financial planning, please feel free to give us a call. Our number here is 978-531-8108. That's 978-531-8108. Or you can reach us on the web, on the World Wide Web, you know, friedmanfinancial.com. That's Friedman.
2 E's and a D.
Financial.com. That's usually my line, so you know he picked it up really quickly there. So.
Next time I'll have to do and let you You're more natural 2 E's and a D.
Yes, exactly. In any event, you can go to our webpage. You can find out all kinds of information about us. You know, who we are, who we serve, what you need to do to set up an initial consultation. We also have a newsletter that goes out every Friday morning at 10:30. And if you'd like to sign up for that, you can go to any page on the Friedman Financial site and put in your email address, and we will put you on our weekly email. and you'll start to receive that. So thank you very much, Christian, for
Thank you for having me
joining
on.
me today, and I really appreciate it and all the information. And we'll see all of you next week, and tune in. And if you want to listen to this as a podcast or want to view it, you can do either one, video or podcast.
Absolutely.
Find it wherever you find all of your other podcasts. I always go to Apple Podcasts. So have a wonderful week, everyone, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Bye-bye.
During today's episode of Dollars and Cents with Friedman Financial, your host may have discussed specific financial planning and investment ideas that are for general information only and not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations. Please remember that investing involves risk and may include loss of principal. Always consult a certified financial planner professional, qualified attorney, or tax advisor prior to investing to determine what is appropriate for you. Securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor, member FINRA, SIPC.